Welcome, Associate Professor Andrew Waa from the University of Otago. Tell me first of all, how are you finding the conference? What are you learning, enjoying from it?
It's good for me. I haven't been to a World Conference for almost 20 years, I think it is, and so seeing the movement and the conversation in that time from where it was very much a business as usual type discussion, we're talking about cessation and health promotion and very, very important things, of course, but now talking really seriously about ending the epidemic and having really good, robust conversations about what that actually means. I think sometimes, and especially in the current environment, it can become divisive, and we all have opinions about what the end games are, but just the fact that we're having that debate is really, really cool, and just the vibrancy and all the ideas that are coming from different parts of the planet. I'm excited to see all the stuff happening.
So New Zealand was poised to really take the biggest step towards an end game, and then didn't quite manage to get the implementation, but you had the law, didn't you? So can you recap for us what was happening and what is happening now?
It's like reliving the trauma, but so it was really exciting, and we, I think the end game story happened. It starts back in the mid-2000s for us, about the time when I went to the last World Conference, and at that time we, among Māori, the indigenous peoples of Aotearoa, New Zealand, there'd been a long history of tobacco control program, and we'd seen all the business as usual stuff, which is great, important stuff, but we'd only seen really incremental reductions in smoking, vapes were a thing at that time, obviously. And what we'd also seen was this perpetuation of inequities in smoking, particularly for Māori, and so some of our leaders at the time said, look, this is we've got to do something different, we've got to change the songbook, and what tobacco control had been doing at that time, and I think still does to a degree, was focus on the individuals too much, and we needed to focus on the industry, and so that's when the discourse started, and then there was lots of conversations, lots of really good advocacy. We had a government inquiry into the impact of the tobacco industry on Māori health. That was really seminal in terms of where Aotearoa as a country went in terms of tobacco control. The government made a commitment of the time, but didn't do much for 15 years, and then with the second term of the Ardern government, where they had a majority coalition, and we had a health minister who was an epidemiologist who knew her stuff, introduced the end-game measures. And that was after and I think she was obviously keen to do something that's going to make a difference, but also she talked a lot to the sector, to the researchers, to Māori, to different organisations and people, and sort of reflected what was being said. And so the lead measures in this piece of legislation that was passed was introducing very low nicotine cigarettes, so essentially making tobacco non-addictive. I think that's closest you can get to a cigarette ban. And the other one was reducing retail outlets by 90%, so make it hard to access retail. The third one was introducing the smoke-free generation. I think that's really important. There was debate about whether that should have gone further around vaping, because if anything, what we've seen in Aotearoa is an explosion of vaping rates. But anyway, there was something that we thought we could come back to. And so that was all poised to come into play in 2024. We had a change in government. There was I think it was part of it was the COVID backlash, a really conservative politics, polarisation, all that sort of thing. And that government was voted out, and we had a coalition government come in with two very minor parties who are quite right-wing, I'd say. I'd argue that very heavily influenced by the industry, including the main National Party. And as part of their coalition agreement, they said that they were going to get rid of, repeal this legislation. And I think through the whole thing, they've been asked what was the reason why they're repealing it. They keep on saying, it's because it's in the coalition agreement, without any real evidence. And when they've been asked to say what the reason, they've just spouted out the old zombie industry arguments like illicit trade, it's unproven. Arguments that we know have been time and time disproven, but they just kept on saying it. So it was a real challenging time, but that didn't mean we didn't fight back at the time. So there's a petition, there was an unprecedented protest at the Parliament grounds. There was quite a few thousand people there. was only one of the it was the first of many protests at the Parliament that's happened over the last couple of years. There have been some quite concerning things happening with this government. There was also a legal challenge through our Waitangi tribunal. So the Waitangi tribunals related to a treaty that was signed between Māori and the Crown back in 1840 to protect the interests of Māori who were being exploited by colonisation. One of the tools of colonisation is tobacco, and so the government in repealing legislation was enabling a tool of colonisation to come back. So that was a strong challenge, but the government stepped around the process and kind of gazumped it, I guess, in terms of bringing the repeal forward. But that challenge is probably still in play.
Mm. Because the Maori people have a strong sense of community and roots and history. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, I think the history of Māori people of New Zealand is navigators and sailors across the Pacific Ocean, and so our stories always talk about where we're from within Aotearoa. My tribe is called Ngāti Hine, which is in the northern part of New Zealand, but we link to our tribes, and then those tribes link back to the voyaging canoes where they came from, and they all link back to Hawaii, which is our ancestral homeland. So that sort of story of navigation, but also it kind of comes through many of the metaphors that we have. So, using navigation of the stars, being able to take on challenges, that often sort of talks about these sort of voyages and protecting what it is to be well and healthy and all that sort of thing. So I think that was important, but also because of the impact of colonisation, similar to many other countries, we see it happen in Australia in some way, in similar but also different ways, America, Canada, all those sorts of places. And one of the big things about colonisation is this sort of products that are introduced and used to exploit the people. And so tobacco has been, in some ways interesting in the sense that it's always been a lead health issue for Māori because it seemed to be one of the most, it impacts our health almost more than any other substance, but also it's been seen as one of the leading tools of colonisation for us. So that's one reason why it's a huge issue for us.
And I see the industry as very exploitative, including with the products that's brought forward, like e-cigarettes and nicotine pouches. I don't know, what's your experience of that?
There's evidence that the industry exploits Māori or Indigenous peoples in these three different ways. It exploits them, uses the imagery on tobacco products. So you've seen it with Native American products. Happens some awful racist stuff with promoting Aboriginals and tobacco. It's happened with Māori. Recently it happened on some cigarette packages that were produced by Philip Morris a few years ago. Another way of exploitation is as a market, to sell their products. And the third way, which is really concerning and sort of signals, I guess it's a tactic that's always been used, but it's a tactic that I think we needed to be more on the ball of, because I think it was really part of the repeal, was the way that they can play the political system, the tobacco industry. And for Māori, in particular, and other Indigenous peoples, because we have influence in our political systems, they said if they can grow alliances with Māori, then that gets them the seat at the table. And we saw that with organisations like the Foundation for a Smoke-Free World. They targeted Indigenous peoples. They set up an Indigenous research centre. They overtly try and recruit Māori as part of their teams. I mean, they currently have people in there who are Māori. So it's just trying to get a sort of seat at the table. And we've seen in some of the industry documents is that they explicitly say that we're going to target people who have influence at the table. So we think we've been exploited in those three different ways. Yeah.
I'm certain that you are. Yes.
Yeah.
Andrew, where is the hope and the vision for Aotearoa from your perspective?
I think that the vision from a Māori perspective, and I think it's quite, I've heard it's similar to most of what we've heard in the conference, is that we want a future that's nicotine free and that's free of exploitation of addiction and big tobacco. So that's the word that was coined in Aotearoa was tūpeka kore, which is tobacco free. At the time, in 2005 when it was first coined, it was vapes weren't a thing, but it was meant to extend beyond smoke free. I think smoke free said its time, but I think there's problems because the industry uses that term. But the vision is tūpeka kore, which is for Māori, because it's tied to experience of colonisation, it's an end to exploitation and nicotine addiction.
Andrew, before I finish, is there anything you'd like to talk about that we haven't covered?
I think there's. I think the really good thing about the conferences such as this is thinking and talking about different experiences, how we think about, what the goal is, because in some ways we're trying to understand what harm means in different cultures and different experiences, understand harm in different ways, and so we've got to be inclusive of all those perspectives. I think the experience in Aotearoa New Zealand is that policies that might work for us might work so well in other settings. We have a massive 3,000 kilometre wide moat, which is really good in terms of limiting the amount of illicit trade that might come across the borders. But I am concerned about some of the illicit products ending in Australia, because the sources could easily end up in New Zealand as well. So I think there's heaps of similarities, but also acknowledging the differences, but the solidarity and work towards common goals is really important, so that's what I've been enjoying at this conference.
Is there any wisdom from the Maori people for the next generation, for the aim of health, for the aim of community and being free from colonial exploitation? Is there anything that sums it up for you? And that's a difficult question, but I'll give you a bit of time to think about it.
I would say it's a name we've used for a project, but it's a proverb, and it goes ka pū te rūha, ka hao te rangatahi, which is literally translates into the old net is cast aside and the new net goes fishing, which means it's time to let young people come and have the voices, and I think that's a really important thing. One of my concerns is that we're very much defining tobacco now, but actually some of the decisions that we're going to make, particularly around vaping, it's going to affect our future generations who see and understand and experience harm much differently than what we might be seeing or experiencing, so making sure their voices are at the table.
Thank you. Andrew, that's been brilliant, inspiring as always, and thank you so much for speaking with us.
Cool, thank you.